Hello and welcome to The Wizard and the Priestess. My name is Nola and this is
Matt.
Today we are following on from our conversation about childhood development, and Matt is going to jump into...
Well, I'll finish off the infant development because we spoke about that last week and the development of the child's brain and how that needs to be educated, how it learns, etc., etc. So from up until age, I think it's 7, it's predominantly right hemisphere dominant. The child learns through not definitions, but through characterizations. The child learns through creativity, building, art, all these kinds of stuff. From ages 7 to 12, the analytical brain starts to kick in. So that's the left brain. They start forming their own ideas, their own solutions. And then from age 12, we actually develop the neurological capacity to take on someone else's idea and see both sides of the coin. But our current schooling system doesn't quite nurture that very well. What do you think, Nilla?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We are in we're in an era where this current schooling system, the institution of the system, is a form of care. And it's
babysitting.
It's essentially a form of care so we can keep the mother and the father both in the workforce to ensure that the economy of the country continues. The way that then works is to ensure that the children are being institutionalized so that they are essentially employable, stable. And how do we ensure that? Well, we need to make sure that they can follow rules, that they understand that there is competition. We support them into becoming scarce consumers, and we support them into essentially filling their brains with enough of the information that keeps them within those bounds.
Yep.
Now, there's a reason for that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's not to say that is all bad, but it is definitely... it's essential that there is a curriculum and that there is subjects and that there is an age-based learning, because then they can have the curriculum and they can have the worksheets, because everyone essentially can fall into this point at this point of their development.
This little box, right?
Yeah, to ensure that everyone in that room is following that same piece.
Yep.
And so those structured lessons with those deliberate aims and outcomes are the only way that you can teach 30 children in one moment the same thing.
Yeah. And expecting every single child to hear the same thing, have the same experience of that new piece of knowledge and pass the test, essentially.
Yeah.
And if you don't pass the test, then you're deemed stupid or dumb or slow, or maybe you need a medication for that. Maybe you need extra schooling on top of that. So it's not really set up for human spirit, that's for sure.
Or human development, as you just described. If we're using our right side brain, maybe, Matt, you want to dive a little bit more into what the right side brain, like we have touched on that, but like just the right side brain actually does. So why is it that we can nurture that with creativity?
So the right brain is all about your intuition. Babies are extremely intuitive. They're actually more intuitive than they are, let's say, logical, rational thinkers. They need to be, because with that right brain dominance, you can absorb more from your environment. People who are stuck in their left brain tend to be very shut off from creativity, but also absorbing they absorb knowledge in factual form. They can recite a quote, for example, but someone with a right brain who's heard the quote has an experience with that quote. And not just that quote, but that specific subject. And this is needed because the infant needs to experience its environment through its own way. So everyone's a genius in their own right. the schooling system, as Einstein said, I think it was Einstein, who said they judge a goldfish's ability to climb a tree. So if a child isn't nurtured the way it needs to be nurtured, then it grows up poor self-esteem, poor posture, poor breathing, all the things that we see clinically, right? So
thinking that it's a tree climbing fish, which it
just
can't
confused.
do. Very confusing.
Yeah.
In a world of confusion, it is added.
More confused.
Yeah, and I guess that's absolutely one of the biggest reasons why then people with this knowledge go, okay, so what can I do when the only thing I understand is the institution and the system? And there are so many options out there, but it actually takes a lot more effort and energy to lean into, because the systems are set up to be care for our child and to take the pressure off, like a free care program that will essentially spit out little robots at the end that are employable, that follow the rules, that follow authority, that are capable of doing, to fit into the box, that we have just enough variation that we can fill every employable job.
Well, there's enough variation to give the illusion that you have some freedom, where you're really being conditioned to, as you said, do it this way, say it this way, do this, pay this, buy that. And then we're on the hamster wheel. And that the Western school system was actually, that concept came from the slave days, where the workers would be out in the fields working away, but they had children to look after. So the, what are they called? The slave owners, I suppose. They would have all these children in a box, like in a room, I mean, not in an actual box. Maybe they did, I don't know, I wasn't there. They were in this room, they were babysat, but they were actually taught to follow orders because they were going to be the next generation of
slaves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's quite, I mean...
It's not too dissimilar today.
No, and I guess so that's where this sort of tangent grows, and it's like, okay, like it is said everywhere, every day, all the time, life is short, you know, feel into what feels right, or, you know, life is short, you know, the grandfather who's about on his deathbed, the first thing he says is like, oh, I wish I played more. I wish I loved more. I wish I did the things that lit me up and gave me joy. I wish I focused on those things in my life. And so I guess we believe that that is something that we're trying to do, is to lean into those things. And so when I, as my oldest daughter starts to move towards school age in Australia.
Is that 5? Is there an official age? Or is it?
You must be registered in Australia to be actively in school by 6 years age, by your 6th birthday, which is okay, but essentially we are of the idea and the culture. So that's what it is like in legislation, but the culture is to get your kids in school as soon as possible.
Right.
There's a little bit more of a pullback now that, you know, actually the brain isn't really ready to sit at a table and rote learn.
Just remember shit.
From 5 years old. So it's probably best to hold them back, you know, instead of starting school at 4, turning 5, it's probably best to start school
7.
at 5, turning 6, or 7 at the very earliest from my perspective. But I think the other aspect is, like, from what we've said, why would you want to create a robot when you look at your child and you see this, like, this is the thing, right? I don't think everyone wants to put their children into school, but what are they going to do? They have to have 2 incomes to be able to provide themselves the home. And daycare's expensive. So school's free. Once they're in school, I've got a 9 to 3 window of free care. and I can go back and continue to do the hamster wheel thing so that I can provide for the family and ensure that I have just enough. And if you talk to anyone these days, that everyone's struggling and no one can handle it. It's like, oh, we've been conditioned to believe this.
Yeah.
Being
Absolutely. But we're thriving a lot more than we think we are. But because we don't have, we've been told that we need to be on a certain level. And if we don't hit that level set by someone else, then we're struggling. So it's really, it's a spell.
And it's the same when you're employed.
Yeah.
Now you need to work your way up.
Yeah.
Now you need to like prove yourself. Now you need to compete with every other pleb in the space. Now you need to like keep going until you reach the top, and then you'll be happy.
And burnt out in brackets.
What's that cool? I think I've said this before, but I watched this guy and he, or maybe not, but he said he was a fisherman. He'd go out from 4 a.m. He'd come home at 10. He'd have lunch at 11. And then he would spend the rest of the day with his family. And this businessman came in and said, hey, man, do you know what you could do? And he just would catch one fish a day. That's all he needed. He's like, you know what you could do? You could go out from 4 until 2. You could catch 2 fish. And with that sale of that second fish, you could buy yourself another boat, and you could get someone else to go out and do the same fish as you, and work from 4 till 2, catch 2 fish, you pay them for half a fish, and then you've got 1.5 extra fish that you can then get more money for. And then you can work every day like this, and then one day you can retire. And you can live happy, and you can spend all that extra time with your family, and you can rest and you can play. And he's like, I'm doing that right now. Why would I bother going through the rigmarole of buying fishing boats and having employees and doing all these things when that's the life I live? And the businessman was sort of stumped, because he's like, oh, but why would you want to do that? So why would you want to just do the 4 to 10 and then have your lunch and then play with your family? How could you want to do that when you could go and do all this thing and then have, sometimes have a holiday? It's like we have been brainwashed into believing that this is the way of the world.
It's the only way, right? I mean, look at tribal societies. All of the hunting and gathering and building and whatever else needed to be done was done from essentially sunrise to about lunchtime, give or take. And then they spent the rest of the time educating their children, playing with their children, arts and crafts, and that was...
And I guess this kind of comes into that idea of what you can do to kind of, first of all, is to de-school the mind. So we've got to kind of move out of this idea of structure and the way planned lessons and things, and start moving into following the child or having them follow you. So moving in ways that's like, okay, we're going to go out in nature. We're going to explore the seasons. We're going to explore the tides. We're going to understand the flow. Because we have this idea that hunter-gatherer times were so bad, and now we've got it so much better.
Well, they say that we're living longer, which we're not. So being a hunter-gatherer actually worked really well for us, from a health perspective especially. And then the Industrial Revolution and the World Wars came along, and now everything's sprayed, everything's got chemicals on it. We have to work 90 hours a day, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
And I guess that's the thing of another option is that we use this idea of exploration and self-discovery, or exploration to harness self-discovery, and that's just through living. And that's actually being with a parent or a caregiver.
Yeah.
That's just watching you and following your lead.
And one of the healthiest things a child and an adult can do is play. Just unbound play. Adult has it in their mind that play has to be structured. If you're going to build a sandcastle, it has to be perfect, perfect edges to the millimetre. And if a wave comes, it's an absolute catastrophe. A kid will just knock it over and laugh and play with the shell over there. So adults have certainly lost the capacity to play, which ironically they need to play like a child to open that right brain up. And kind of stunting a kid's development by showing them how to play, their child how to play, just activates that left brain too early, and then they become stifled in their own creativity. But a lot of schooling systems kind of, I guess they dumb that down pretty quick, but others don't. So there are some.
But I think the thing to remember is that if you've got 30 children in a classroom and one caregiver, you have to do it this way. I don't think that, I don't think any teacher that goes into teaching these days goes, this is going to be so good. I'm going to get 30 kids and they're going to have all of their emotional baggage.
Maybe day one they will.
Maybe. I mean, even then you're like, okay, I'm going to get 30 kids like that. Kindergarten, kids that have been a literally 1-to-5 ratio in preschool at the max, and now getting a care of 1-to-25 or 30. And the kids are meant to be like, yes, sweet, this is sick. Like, you are going to have so much backlash. The system is not created for that. They're then having to incorporate aspects that are so against emotional development, where a screaming child is essentially pulled away from the caregiver and the mother told, when you leave, the child stops crying. It's like, well, of course they did. They're no longer safe. You don't see a crying child in an unsafe environment. They will stop crying because they know they are not going to have their needs met.
Yeah.
And so we're stifling this emotional development, or we're stifling this emotional child, and then that child goes home to their mother and father and then lets it rip because they have held it in all day, and their frustration that they must have built up in that time. And I'm not saying that that's every child in every situation at all, but it is something to be very conscious of. If your, crying child does not want you to leave, there is nothing in the playbook other than it makes it easier for the care provider. Because if you're looking after 10, 20, 30 kids, then I kind of need you to sit down and shut up and not cause a havoc. And then it's easier to just have a child that's been somewhat emotionally neglected, not by deliberately harming, but just by the setup of the institution and the systems in place, that the mother was separated from the child from day one or 6 weeks to get back to work 5 days a week. That's not...
That ultimately sets the child up for mental health issues as an adult.
Absolutely. And physical health.
Particularly bipolar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And physical health issues.
Massive, yeah.
Because everything stems from the emotions. So if we know all these things, we understand the science of the brain, we understand the way in which the formation of the brain occurs, and yet we still are using these outdated measures because of the fact that we need to get back to work and make money, where we've been constantly told life is too short to worry about the money. It's like, what a conundrum. And then we have these options, right? So, for example, as I kind of traverse this idea of, okay, what we're going to do next year. Thus far, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing in terms of nature play and being outside and trying to follow the lead and imagination of my children. But there's options, you've got the Montessori style, the Waldorf-Steiner style, or you've got the unschooling, homeschooling style, and then you've got so many other options in terms of curriculum supports that you can work with in terms of homeschooling. So there's lots of ones that are focused on books, and then lots of ones that are focused on, imaginatory play, or, different things for parents. Because essentially it is very difficult to go from being a schooled person, adult, to then be like, okay, I can see that this is all wrong, but I still want a plan. How am I going to go in and plan this way at this day? And you know what, in some ways, maybe having a structured lesson plan isn't the worst thing when you're with your mother or father. However, from my perspective, the first 7 years, I wouldn't say it's useful other than for the teacher or the parent. The child itself is going to do much better with open-ended play, with just, offering different things that they can gravitate towards and figure out on their own and invent and discover with. Just a bit of a very brief breakdown, but Montessori style is all about the physical form. A lot of boys can gravitate well to that idea because it's, they get to use their hands.
Right.
So Montessori herself, can't think of her first name, but she was literally one of her ethos is you learn everything. Everything moves through the hands and then comes into the mind.
Right.
That's her philosophy. Whereas the Waldorf or Rudolf Steiner schooling is more, or unschooling or whatever, curricular education is based on everything moves through the body and therefore is. So it's all about imagination, whereas the Montessori schooling is that the child actually can't distinguish between what's real and what's not. So we keep it very physically focused. And then on the but on the very opposite end of that is the Rudolf Steiner school saying, no, everything is emotional, everything is imaginative, and everything is kind of encompassed in that way. So we don't really need anything physical, or we want to kind of allow a child, there's lots of dolls with no faces on them. So it's like the child can use their imagination as to what they might be feeling or experiencing rather than a face giving them that.
Yeah.
That is very much where I sit. And so a lot of my, brainwashing or my, the way I think comes from that space, because if we know the brain, and the brain essentially takes till 7 until the right side brain's sponginess starts to become a little bit calcified in the left towards the left side, or moves out of the right side and moves more into that callosum or whatever it's called in the middle, and then starts to move more into the left brain, and that communication then starts to increase as time goes on. It makes more sense to be focused on that imagination. It makes more sense that if the intuition is primed at this time, we should be really focusing on nourishing and holding this space more and more, and not be so focused on, at the very least, completely shunning it. And it's quite interesting how these sorts of ideas come together, in a sense that Montessori would be very right side, as in right side of politics, very much extreme right wing all the way over there.
Yeah.
Whereas Steiner would be more extreme left wing. But somehow that wing, they start to join at the back or something. They start to become enmeshed, but they are, if not more opposite than they are, they're more dissimilar than they are similar.
Yeah.
And then you have all the other schooling ideas in the centre. But I do really like the idea of the walking the path of the unschooling path.
How's the homeschooling? Have you investigated that much?
Yeah, a little bit. In what way? What's the
Just
question?
in your opinion, is it, I'm not going to say better or worse, but it would work for some people, not others?
Yeah. In terms of homeschool versus going to institutionalized school. Okay, so I would say that it's absolutely homeschooling over institutionalized school for a child under the age of 7, any day of the week. But the idea of homeschooling is something you can do normal school curriculum at home, which therefore gives a one-on-one schooling program. Or you can choose something very like a complete unschooling system, so that you can still, be conscious of the difference between homeschool and institutionalized school. They could be the same thing. It's just that a one-on-one
That's a
teaching.
different environment, yeah.
Yeah. So that obviously is better for a younger child.
What about 7 to 12?
For homeschooling?
Yeah.
I think absolutely. I would be, if it functions for a family, yes.
Yeah.
Because you cannot, we have been institutionalized or systemized to believe that taking the parent out of the home and putting them back to work and in the economy is better than them actually rearing the child.
Yeah.
But no child can be more loved than that child that is with the parent or caregiver. None. You can never love a child as much as a caregiver can. If you are even and that caregiver can be a teacher. That's not to say that you can't have an allo parent type person or someone that steps into that role.
Yeah.
As I always say, I have this vision of having a teacher be the teacher for my child from day throughout her learning life. Or until such time as she's ready and feels ready to go do her own thing. But having that one steady person feels safe and solid from my perspective. Doesn't necessarily have to be me. However, the change and confusion and having lots of different teachers and lots of different people, I don't think it doesn't serve nurturing a child really. When the whole thing is the mechanism of safety and the importance of that.
Yeah.
And especially in a world where we're so emotionally unstable, mainly emotionally unstable because our economical world is out of sorts. And if that is out of sorts, then we're unable to thrive. And if a parent is unable to thrive, then a child is unlikely to thrive.
What was your schooling experience like?
I liked school. I was very studious. But I also like to talk.
I did not know that.
I think on every single report that was ever written about Norla Walker, she was told that she is quite studious, but she's very distracting for the other children. She likes to talk a lot. And I didn't get shamed and guilted, which I think can be quite a common thing when in school, when a child is like, no talking, out of classroom. I mean, that did happen to me. I remember being kicked out of maths class a few times.
Talking?
For talking. You're not meant to talk when you're meant to be doing the schoolwork.
Yeah.
And then as things got more exciting as I got older, talking was much more interesting than the maths that I was trying to learn. I quite liked maths though.
Yeah.
So I quite liked learning. I think I probably needed a little bit more support in terms of how to be socially responsible and things, I could have been a nicer person, I think.
Good to see nothing's changed.
I think I'm quite... Oh, I know that feels really bad to say, but I mean, and the reality is I did need more support. I needed to be modelled probably better social interaction than the modelling that I was given.
Yeah.
And
Are you referring to high school or primary school? Or both?
probably a bit of both.
Okay.
I think primary school you can kind of see the innocence of what was, you can kind of understand, I can't be out of the pack, so I learnt to be in the pack.
You got to be accepted.
Totally, right. And how to be accepted. Well, you do certain things that is totally unacceptable.
Yeah.
But somehow we're accepted by a few people, so that was worthwhile. But school was okay. I definitely was very happy to learn in the way that it was being given, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And what about you?
Hated it.
Yeah, from Daily
I was
Dot.
not... primary school is a bit of a blur because you're just playing with your mates.
You don't remember primary school?
Not really.
Gosh.
Bits and pieces, but not...
I remember everything.
I went to Catholic schools.
Oh, that's right.
Did you go to... You didn't go to...
No.
No. So I was indoctrinated into that
System.
thing. And I probably had to educate myself. I want to rephrase that. I had to school myself outside of education because I grew up with a lot of... Anyone who's gone to a Catholic school can probably resonate with this. As an adult, just when you've left school, you carry with you a lot of Catholic guilt because you get drilled into you. God loves you unconditionally. unless you do these 10 things, which are conditions. So it's very confusing as a child. So sitting in a classroom trying to remember stuff wasn't for me. I was good at sport and geography. I think that was pretty much it. And lunchtime. I was really good at lunchtime.
Or recess. I feel like you would have been a better recess guy.
I did dominate recess, but lunch was where I shined. mainly at handball.
Oh, handball. Yeah. I'm just thinking snack man must have been around at that point.
No, recess was snack, and then there's no time to eat at lunchtime because you get the best spot on the handball court. Everyone knows
Don't
this.
you just win and then get yourself to the good spot?
Well, no, because the person in front of you gets out, so you move up, and then, tell you what, video referee was around in that day. Oh, where could I be? Anyway.
Nowhere. Just in the square, literally boxing yourself in.
Relax. So
stressful.
So I had, that type of education system did not work for me at all. And because my dad's very academic, as you know, very left brain, I couldn't be more right brain, relatively speaking.
At that time.
Especially at that time, yeah. I had to leave school to become a nerd. I had to leave school to then enjoy learning. But not that I didn't like learning, but I remember one time I got really upset. I think I told you about this, where I think this was actually in primary school. This is why I don't remember primary school, but this is PTSD.
Trauma.
Long division.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Still haven't used long division today, nor algebra, just saying. So learning how long division works, Dad's an accountant. He gets the maths. He gets all that. He's trying to teach it to me, and he might as well be talking Japanese. Like, I don't know. In my head, I'm saying, I don't care. I don't want to learn this. I know I've got to pass the test, but
30 divided by 5,063 doesn't really bother me.
So
1, carry the 3, bring it down. Oh,
sorry.
Sorry.
Just passed out for a second. Just fainted.
All of a sudden, my mind just went black. The trauma is triggered.
I'm going to start twitching soon. It's okay. I'll just go home and sharpen the knives. So anyway. I can't say that.
No.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Paris. Or not, whatever. So learning long division and Dad's
traumatic.
kind of laughing at me and like, how can't you understand this? I remember crying, saying, because it's stupid. I don't need this. So I still haven't used it. So I technically was correct in the moment. But that was the education system I grew up in. And we even got taught, I think it was in early high school, if you don't do well, you don't go to heaven. Say that to a child. That's how you fuck a child up.
Yeah, right.
So year 7, you were 13? Year 7?
12, 13,
yeah.
I think.
So tell that to a 12, 13-year-old. They wear that.
Yeah, that's pretty full on, hey? I think that's so interesting. I didn't go to Catholic school, but I grew up going to church from a very young age until blasphemy and like the commandments were crossed and like divorce occurred. And it's like, oh, hang on a minute. I can't do these things, but you guys can.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's quite an interesting thing, isn't it, to think that that a young child is being told that you are loved unconditionally always and forever until you do the wrong thing.
Well, not only are you loved always unconditionally, first of all, you're born with sin.
Oh.
And then if you don't put some water on your head, then you go to hell.
Oh, yeah.
I got kicked out of religion because I called God a psychopath because that was one of the conditions of going to heaven.
Did you put water on your head?
I didn't personally, but I'm sure
you were baptised.
Probably, yeah.
Were you all the things?
What's all
baptised, reconciled, confirmed.
Probably.
Communioned.
I would have, yeah, for sure. That's why I'm an angel today.
Yeah, obviously. I'm the same too, obviously.
Well, but funnily enough, that really sparked in me to investigate the real meanings like real mystical teachings behind Christianity. So that journey for me undid a lot of that education scarring.
Yeah, big stuff, isn't it?
Boom.
I think, I mean, obviously, yeah. I think we've spoken about this before, where you have talked about Catholicism being, or even Christianity, or religion in general, that dogma of ways to be, and in order, if that's not how you are. And I think the hardest, saddest thing is that there's so much shame and guilt for parents on children. So then they shame and guilt their child.
Or just passed down.
And it's just like, oh, I'm feeling really uncomfortable that you've had this experience, where you were like attacked or abused, and now I'm shamed because, to think that now has happened, So maybe, as a young girl has been raped, and then her father or mother are like, oh, well, we don't want anyone to know this thing. We're just going to sweep it under the rug and pretend it never happened.
Yeah.
And this poor child is sitting there going, well, I didn't think there was anything wrong with doing that. It didn't seem rapey at the time. I didn't know what rape was at the time. I was young and little. And now I'm wearing this. Yeah. Not only am I wearing this, I don't know if I can trust myself, but I also don't know if I can. You guys aren't safe to express this to, so that means that that's not safe to express. So I better bury that.
Deep.
And
I'm going to let it shine unconsciously in every single relationship I have for the rest of my life.
Yeah. And I mean, I think too, we do this thing where we're like, oh, my kid's in care all day, 6 hours a day, for 5 days a week. And then we're like, but we won't let them, God forbid, if they could like go catch the train on their own somewhere.
Yeah.
It's like you literally, it's sort of, I mean, obviously school should be a safe place, but it's like, I guess that's the one thing we know that it is not, because there's little kids like that are not being supported and cared for in the way they need to be at home. And so it's a cesspool full of like deep emotional scarring that's occurred from the minute they were dropped off in preschool. And that's not to shame or guilt parents for having to make these choices. But what I would hope is that they're feeling into this idea that you can do things differently. We need to stop being like, I made a post about a month or two ago about life is what we make it. And in that post, what I was trying to get to is, it's like, we can't just be like, this child is to be the change. Like, the children will be the change that we want to see in the world. No, you must be the change that you want to see in the world, and the child will do as they see. And they will experience as you experience. I mean, they'll feel what you're feeling, and then they will decipher what that experience means for them.
Yeah.
And so it's like, be the change. And I think, like, personally, I feel like I'm trying to do that. Some days it's easier than others, but it's, I'm making choices that I'm thinking, I'm rationally going or intuitively going, this feels good for me. And then logically I'm going, that looks really bad for me. That's a really big expense for me. But at the end of the day, what do I want to do? Do I want to spend that money now and spend this time with my family as they grow and nurture that brain that literally is soaking everything in? Do I want to be the person that they're soaking in? Or do I want to choose a cheaper, more average option, because in the long term then I'll have a little bit more money? I'll still probably be complaining.
Good to know.
Yeah. Shut up. But, like, either way, whatever we choose, we're going to complain about somewhere. It's everything's give and take, but you get to choose that. And for me, the most important thing is that my children know that they are loved unconditionally, that they're able to be seen and heard, that they're able to express themselves in a way that feels safe and nurtured, and that I can be there for them.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, everything else around that obviously is nice to have, It's nice to have a little bit extra when it comes to economics. It's nice to have a little bit more so that you can experience a few more things. But at the end of the day, if you have those extra things, are you feeling and giving more love? I don't see that.
Do you think people that have the little extra you're talking about actually think for themselves?
I mean, they might. I have a little bit extra. All right.
Is it like a...
little bit extra here.
That makes more sense on the video.
Oh, yeah. I'm just holding my basketball-sized child.
Yeah. No, but the point I was making, the people that, I can't remember how you phrased it, but whatever they do to have a little bit extra, can you say that again?
But just the idea that, you know, to have something along the lines of having a little bit of extra money essentially means that you have taken away love.
It's also that taking away is also taking away the child's capacity to think for themselves, because our school system is designed to teach you what to think. Very few people think for themselves. COVID was a prime example of that. The polarity created for that is just proof in itself, regardless of what side you're on. Our capacity to take on someone else's argument develops from the age of 12. So we should be able to have a topic and with equal passion debate both sides and flip over and then do it with equal passion. How many people do you know that can do that?
Yeah, no, but I mean, I can't do that sometimes, so like often. So you've disproved your point.
Well, not really. Maybe you don't think for yourself sometimes.
Maybe I need to work on myself, obviously. But you know what? Actually, something really interesting. I don't know what they're doing in Sweden. Maybe it's because they don't start school until you're 7, but...
Year 7 or till 7?
7 years old.
Okay.
They are much better at having open, clear conversations.
Yeah.
And very much more than anything, they're probably not actually better at having the conversation, but they're much better at listening. They're much better at listening to an opinion that is not their own.
Maybe you could listen. You could learn something.
Mate, I found myself a Swede and I'm all right. That's enough. I only need one listener. I mean, the poor dude does a lot of listening, as you can imagine. Well, ladies and gentlemen.
My mouth is zipped.
I feel like we've come to the end of our schooling conversation today. What I'd hope your take home is, from my perspective, is the importance to make a choice that actually fills the cup up of a child with the knowledge that their right side brain is not capable or shouldn't be at the level of cognition in the way that schooling systems teach until the age of 7. So make a choice and sit in that choice and know that it was the right one if it's intuitively led and not fear-based.
Yeah, I don't have kids, so I don't really say do this or do that. I would like to think that more people now can make up their own mind and realise there's not just one way. You don't just have to follow that particular, the typical school system / university. It was drilled into me as a kid, you have to get good grades, otherwise you can't go to uni, you won't get into uni, you won't be able to you won't be able to pay your way in the world. I hated school, so I thought, well, what am I going to do now? I hate school. I have to go to more school to get to school and then be a contributing member of society. And I saw my parents come home miserable. Not miserable because they were sad, they were just exhausted. So that's what I thought adulthood was. Like, fuck that, I don't want to do that. So I stayed young until I grew up a couple of weeks ago. I'm just saying there's more than one way.
Absolutely. And it is really interesting because I did all the schooling things.
Yeah.
I did the school.
Explains a lot.
I did the university. I did the masters. And I quite enjoyed the schooling learning.
Yeah.
I also had a thinking brain that made me think differently. Like I wasn't just consuming the things that I loved. I loved ethics and there's a I loved all the interesting things that made you think differently.
Did you like the structure?
I did.
Yeah.
And that's probably part of the control, and being like the structure gave me walls and confines with which I could think inside of based upon probably trauma.
Yeah. So I needed to either hear it or see it and then do it.
Yeah.
That was my learning style.
The really cool Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he has a table form of like the best way to actually teach and to learn.
Is that based on learning styles?
I'm not 100% sure what it's based upon.
Right.
I've just looked at the table, and essentially it's like up the top, like right, the top cross section of it is that is you learn through doing.
Yeah. Well, that's the most popular learning style.
Okay.
Kinesthetic learning, doing it.
Yeah.
Then there's, I can't remember the order exactly, but I know kinesthetics right up the top, visual, auditory, and the very last one, I think 5% of the total population is reading, writing, learning. What do they do in school all day?
Yeah.
So
another reason to just think about it.
maybe just stay home. Don't.
And just do it differently. Forget that schools even exist. Like I feel like, I come from a family, my extended family are all teachers.
Yeah, right.
And like principals and, and academics. Like everyone is an academic in my family.
We've got so many schooling options these days as well. Homeschooling wasn't even a thing, I think, when I was growing up.
It was. It just wasn't straight, so you
cool.
didn't know about it.
Right. Parents, seriously.
So straight.
I would close with a quote.
All right.
By Mark Twain, who said, "Don't let your schooling get in the way of your education."
See ya.
You've been listening to The Wizard and the Priestess. Thanks for stopping by. Stay connected and be open.